From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Severide in Washington, Fred Graham in Washington, Bruce Dunning in Saigon, Peter Collins in Saigon, Bob Schieffer in San Diego, and Richard Wagner in San Francisco.
Good evening. President Ford said today that in spite of Congress's limitations on the use of troops overseas, he believes he has the authority to call on the military to protect any evacuation of the 7,000 Americans in South Vietnam. And the president said he is ready to use that authority if necessary. Mr. Ford commented at a news conference in San Diego, and Bob Schieffer reports.
The president was cheered by a crowd outside the convention center where the news conference was held, but he was also booed loudly by several groups of protesters, many of whom carried signs opposing additional American involvement in Vietnam. He had not mentioned the war since coming to California during the weekend, but today most of his news conference was devoted to Indochina.
I have directed that money from a $2 million special foreign aid children's fund be made available to fly 2,000 South Vietnamese orphans to the United States as soon as possible. I have directed that C-5A aircraft and other aircraft especially equipped to care for these orphans during the flight be sent to Saigon. I expect these flights to begin within the next 36 to 48 hours.
How and why did the U.S. miscalculate the intentions of the will of the South Vietnamese to resist?
I don't believe that we miscalculated the will of the South Vietnamese to carry on their fight for their own freedom. There were several situations that developed that I think got beyond the control of the Vietnamese people. The unilateral military decision to withdraw created a chaotic situation in Vietnam that appears to have brought about tremendous disorganization.
A unilateral decision by whom?
It was a unilateral decision by President Thieu to order a withdrawal from the broad, exposed areas that were under the control of the South Vietnamese military.
Can you explain why President Thieu, with our close military ties as allies, did not tell you what he was going to do in terms of the retreat?
I think the only answer to that can come from President Thieu.
Mr. Ford also defended the history of the American involvement in Vietnam.
I still believe that policy was right if the United States had carried it out as we promised to do at the time of the Paris Peace Accords, where we promised, with the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, that we would make military hardware available to the South Vietnamese government on a replacement one-for-one basis. Unfortunately, we did not carry out that promise.
Well, are you blaming Congress for this then?
I am not assessing blame on anyone. I think it's up to the American people to pass judgment on who was at fault or where the blame may rest.
Mr. President, regardless of what caused it, it seems apparent that for the first time in our nation's history, the enemy is about to win a war where Americans fought and died. Do you think that those 55,000 lives were wasted?
I don't think they were wasted, providing the United States had carried out the solemn commitments that were made in Paris at the time American fighting was stopped in South Vietnam.
Is that a yes then, sir?
I still think there's an opportunity to salvage the situation in Vietnam, and if we salvage it, giving the South Vietnamese an opportunity to fight for their freedom, which I think they are anxious to do if given an honest opportunity, then there was not a sacrifice that was inappropriate or unwise. I am convinced that this country is going to continue its leadership. We will stand by our allies, and I specifically warn any adversaries they should not, under any circumstances, feel that the tragedy of Vietnam is an indication that the American people have lost their will or their desire to stand up for freedom any place in the world.
Mr. Ford was expected to stress the need for more humanitarian aid to South Vietnam during this news conference today, but his statement that he will also ask for additional military aid, more perhaps than he has already requested, caught even some of his own aides by surprise, since more and more officials in the administration are saying Vietnam is already a lost cause. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, San Diego.
The question about the president's authority to use troops for an evacuation involves the War Powers Act passed by Congress in 1973 over the veto of then-President Nixon. That law says a president may use troops if there has been an attack on the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. The law says nothing, though, about the protection of Americans overseas, neither authorizing the use of troops nor expressly forbidding it. Spokesmen in the offices of some senators who back the law concede that this is a murky area. Ike Pappas reports from the Pentagon that President Ford's order to evacuate some 2,000 orphans from South Vietnam caught Pentagon logistics experts by surprise. Pentagon officials explained that the cargo planes Mr. Ford wants to use would have to be refitted in Saigon to carry passengers, and that, they say, would take time. It was a different story today from South Vietnam. No major battles, no new government retreats. The government took advantage of this unusual lull to move reinforcements into two threatened provinces, Tay Ninh and Long Con. But the threat against Saigon increased. 5 North Vietnamese infantry divisions, that's 50,000 soldiers, are reported now within 50 miles to the northwest and northeast of the capital. Meanwhile, President Thieu's political problems continue to mount. The strain of opposition has begun to show on the Thieu government. A new 9 p.m. curfew was slapped on Saigon today. Street demonstrations in the capital were banned, and the government issued shoot-to-kill orders to prevent any Saigon protests. This did not stop new calls for Thieu's quick overthrow, however. Bruce Dunning reports now on the mood in South Vietnam's capital.
At the Vietnam Commercial Bank, one of the most trusted in the country, people waited hours to get inside. They had heard the stories from other cities where banks ran out of money as depositors tried to withdraw their savings. Bank officials here did allow customers to withdraw all their savings, but no interest was paid out. Officials said the interest would take too long to calculate. The rich are converting their money to dollars. The black market rate offered by Indian money changers operating in their small shops has reached 1,600 piastres to the dollar, more than twice the official exchange rate. The rich are also buying gold. The price of gold has jumped 40% in the past week. People are also starting to hoard food. The well-to-do are buying large supplies of rice, while the poor just hope that food will be available from day to day. But so far, the rice prices are holding steady, indicating that worry and fear have not yet turned to sheer panic. Life still seems deceptively normal throughout much of Saigon, except where propaganda blares from loudspeakers in an increasingly futile effort to bolster faltering morale. One element that is lacking is the presence of hordes of refugees. The main reason is that the government is trying to control the flow of refugees into Saigon. Only people with homes or relatives here are being allowed in. These people had come from the Central Highlands in a convoy of tears, and then had come by sea to the nearby resort of Vung Tau. They thought they were almost to Saigon, now Vietnam's only vision of a safe haven. But on the outskirts of Saigon, their journey ended. The government ordered this because officials fear that Viet Cong terrorist squads could slip into the city among legitimate refugees. Fear and panic are swift-moving emotions. People panicked quickly in other cities like Hue, Da Nang, and Nha Trang. They could panic quickly here if they sensed the North Vietnamese were moving in on Saigon. The difference is, this time, that from Saigon, there is no place left to run. Bruce Dunning, CBS News, Saigon.
Last weekend, South Vietnam's second largest city, Da Nang, was captured by communist forces, and hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese tried to flee. One of our South Vietnamese cameramen was with them and has only now made it back to Saigon with the last films from Da Nang. Peter Collins narrates.
The full story of the stunning and final collapse of South Vietnamese control in Da Nang may not be known for years, if ever. But for hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese civilians and soldiers trapped in the city, it was an undiluted horror, beginning with fear, then panic, chaos, and rage. On Good Friday, the day before the collapse began, Catholic University students gathered at the main church in Da Nang with banners demanding government transportation south to Saigon. But by then, it was too late, and it quickly became a rush by everyone simply to save themselves. Some people stormed the compound of the International Truce Commission in Da Nang and sacked it. The United States consulate in Da Nang also became a target. By this time, the American staff was gone. The building was looted. Everything was seized and carried away. The large building was left to shambles with the United States flag still flying above. And at the main military hospital, badly wounded soldiers were left to fend for themselves, and those that could walk fled. But some, with no legs to carry them, got no help at all. North Vietnamese shelling of the port area added to the panic, and hundreds of soldiers and civilians rushed to the gates of both the airport and the Navy Yard, seeking some form of escape. But at both places, they were turned away by military police firing their weapons into the air. Many then turned to small boats in the Da Nang harbor in an effort to reach ships of various nations standing offshore. Some of the waiting ships were already crowded with refugees, and soldiers among them opened fire on the approaching small boats for fear that their own vessels would be swamped and unable to get away. CBS News cameraman Chan Van Ba, who filmed all of this report, says the refugees prayed and begged to be let on board the ships. His own ship, a small Vietnamese freighter, took on hundreds of refugees and left Da Nang towing 3 barges, also laden with more civilian refugees and soldiers. But halfway down the coast of Vietnam, cameraman Ba's ship ran out of fuel, and it had to be rescued by a big Vietnamese Navy transport that came alongside. Men and women, children, soldiers scrambled up cargo nets to the Navy ship, helped aboard by sailors. Many of the refugees had gone without food and water for days, and some were too weak or too old to make it and were left behind on the barges, dead. More than 5,000 people jammed their way onto the transport and were dropped off at Cam Ranh, thinking that they were at last safe. This is Peter Collins, CBS News, Saigon.
But